a mega project in which more than 150 countries from around the world participated, where promises were made to build new airports, motorways, and seaports, where dreams of creating the next Dubai and Singapore were shown. But today, in these very countries, this mega project appears incomplete and the dreams seem shattered. Some are burdened under debt while others present a scene of ruins. This was China's biggest global mega project named the Belt and Road Initiative. There was a time when everyone called it the project of the century, but today it is called a geopolitical disaster. And the ones who suffered the most were those poor countries that were shown its rosy dreams. But what exactly happened that now people are pointing fingers at a superpower like China? Once again, welcome to Gem TV's videos, Kushma Dinajlin 2000. In 2013, when China's President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI for short, it was called the biggest plan of the century. Its aim was to create a new Silk Road connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through railways, highways, and ports. China's mission was to put those poor countries on the path of development and to present itself as a global leader. China's vision stunned the world. More than 140 countries expressed interest in this plan, and many poor countries immediately started taking loans from China. In no time, China invested $1.2 trillion in this project. But this money was given by China to those countries in the form of loans, countries that the West Bank or IMF had refused to lend to, considering them too risky. But soon, the true reality of the BRI began to emerge. This was not just an infrastructure project, but a geopolitical and economic agenda of China. In reality, China's industrial capacity had increased to such an extent. That is, every year, hundreds of thousands of engineers were graduating from there. But it was becoming difficult to accommodate them in jobs within China. That's when China devised a plan to employ them and increase its geopolitical power. The plan was to lend money to poor countries for BRI projects, and by utilizing its own industrial capacity on those projects, benefit its own people. The biggest issue with the BRI is debt trap diplomacy. In other words, China gave such large loans to poor countries that they could never repay them, and in return, they were forced to hand over their land or key infrastructure to China. The biggest example of this is Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan leaders were shown dreams that if they built a new port on the Indian Ocean, they could turn it into a regional trade hub like Dubai. The issue with Sri Lanka was that they already had the Colombo port, but it was a transshipment hub where containers were transferred from large vessels to smaller ships. China tempted Sri Lanka with the idea of building a new deep water port on the busy shipping route from the Malacca Strait to the Suez Canal, which would be called the Hambantota port. Now, when Sri Lanka decided to take a $1.3 billion loan from China, China put forward its own conditions in a clever way. The condition was that only Chinese firms would construct this port. The loan. The interest rate was low, but if the loan was not repaid, China had the power. China had the power to take over the project. Well, the construction was completed, but the Hambantota port could never become operational. Feasibility studies showed that there was actually no need for a port here, and the situation was such. Only 30 to 40 ships made stopovers here in a year. Now, since the port itself was not operational, repayment of the loan also became an issue. Things reached a point where, in 2017, under the agreement, Sri Lanka had to hand over the port to the Chinese company for 99 years. Now, all the revenue from that port goes only to China. And in a way, Sri Lanka has lost a part of its sovereignty. A part of it is gone. But Sri Lanka was not the only one to get trapped in this web. Small African country Zambia survives on copper exports, has also fallen into this trap. The leaders there dreamed of modernizing the economy and, with the help of Chinese loans, started several projects. They were given the narrative that the IMF and Western countries have very tough loan conditions. But they never paid attention to the downside. Those conditions stated that if the loan wasn't repaid, China would seize their assets. But the price of these dreams was very high. By 2020, 43% of Zambia's total debt was owed to China alone, and in November 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic caused trade and tourism to come to a halt, and the demand for copper dropped, Zambia defaulted. BRI also created several such plans that were of no use at all. These are called white elephant projects. That is, projects that may look grand and luxurious but have no practical benefit. There is a small country in Europe that took a $1 billion loan from China in 2014. The purpose of this loan was to build the Bar-Boljare highway. But the planning of this project was so poor that they had to cut through mountains to build the highway. So construction began, but all the money ran out just in this small section. Now there's only a 41-kilometer road here that doesn't lead anywhere. So much money was spent on this small part that the country's own entire economy was shaken. Now their debt has now exceeded even 80% of their GDP, and they have to ask the IMF and the European Union for help. Sri Lanka also built an airport near the Hambantota port so that some development could take place in the surrounding area. The Matala Rajapaksa International Airport was built at a cost of $200 million, and this money too was taken as a loan from China. But neither did airlines show any interest, nor did passengers come. Today, the situation is such that this airport is called the world's emptiest airport. It is called that because there are very few flights here, sometimes hardly any at all. On the runway here, elephants and other animals can often be seen roaming around. On the west coast of South America, there is a small, well-known country, and it too has fallen into China's trap. To solve their energy crisis, they collaborated with China to build a dam called Hokkaido-Sinclair, costing $2.6 billion. But during construction, the Chinese contractor ignored quality standards, and it later came to light that officials were bribed to get the work done. As a result, today there are more than 17,000 cracks in the dam's walls. Now, this project could collapse at any moment. It is at risk, which is not just an economic disaster, but also a very serious human and environmental crisis as well. After that, it was Pakistan's turn. CPEC, that is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which was a $60 billion project for Pakistan. Pakistan had hoped that CPEC would bring electricity, jobs, and development, but instead, they were delayed or failed. Gwadar residents protested water, electricity. They held many protests against the Chinese government. The promises of jobs were not fulfilled, and Pakistan's debt burden kept increasing. Now the situation is such that the Gwadar port, earlier under the authority of Pakistan, now it is under China's control. 91% of its revenue is taken by the Chinese, while only the remaining 9% goes to Pakistan. The biggest blow to the BRI came when Italy, the only G7 country that had joined it, announced its withdrawal. China did not give Italy a direct cash loan, but instead signed MOUs, that is, Memorandums of Understanding, which promised Chinese investment and trade deals. But most of the projects did not materialize, and Italy gained very little economic benefit. That's why Italy later called it a big mistake and withdrew from the BRI. Apart from Italy, countries like Malaysia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal have also either cancelled some Belt and Road Initiative projects or renegotiated their terms. Seeing this failure, the United States and Europe have also launched their own alternative initiatives. For example, PGII, that is Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, and Europe's Global Gateway Program. These plans promise transparent and low-interest loans to help avoid China's debt trap. But as a result, the relationship between China and Russia has grown stronger. After Russia's war against Ukraine, it began to feel increasingly isolated. Through the BRI, it closer to China and tried to get closer to China. This has led to the formation of a new geopolitical axis, poses challenge to American dominance, and could become a new challenge. After 10 years and spending trillions of dollars, the Belt and Road Initiative is now considered one of the biggest foreign policy failures in modern history. The biggest reason for this failure was that it was never really meant for development, but rather for China's own interests. China wanted to export its excess industrial capacity, gain access to raw materials, and increase its geopolitical power. At the same time, most of the loans that China gave were in Chinese yuan, because China also wanted to promote its own currency. Today, the Belt and Road Initiative stands at a new turning point. China is rebranding as BRI 2.0 once again. In this, more emphasis is being placed on digital infrastructure, green energy, and sustainable projects. But the world is no longer ready to believe in promises like before. Now, countries will only accept those projects that can provide real economic benefits and not just increase the burden of debt. The question is, will the BRI, while other countries suffered so much loss from it, did China actually gain anything from it or not? In reality, what China wanted did not happen as planned. China wanted to increase its control over the world, but instead, because of the BRI, it got labeled as debt trap diplomacy. Because of the BRI, China, its own economy has slowed down. The responsibility of recovering hundreds of billions of dollars in loans and managing the projects it took over has also fallen on China as well.
On the other hand, through the BRI, China has taken direct or indirect control of more than 100 ports around the world, which is quite beneficial for China's exports. It's very advantageous. If the entire BRI network is completed, it will be the longest road, rail, and sea connection from Asia to Europe, covering 65% of the world's population, will be included. We hope that you will also like and share this video from GemTV a lot. Thank you so much for your loving comments.